The fire didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm she looked while watching it burn. There was no panic in her face, no shock, no flinch as the flames swallowed my car in a hiss of melting paint and black smoke. Just folded arms, a smug smile, and that same pearl necklace she always wore, gleaming like a trophy in the orange glow of arson. She torched my car like it was a bonfire at a block party, and she did it while staring me dead in the eyes. "This," she said coolly, "is what happens when you think you're above the rules." She thought I was just another stubborn homeowner, just another square peg refusing to fit into her plastic suburban fantasy. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that she'd just declared war on the wrong man. Because I wasn't new to intimidation. I'd spent the last 23 years breaking apart crime families who made Deborah Langston look like a schoolyard bully. I'd gone head-to-head with cartel enforcers, mafia captains, corrupt cops, and cold-blooded CEOs. I didn't just know the playbook she was using. I taught it, prosecuted it, and watched it crumble under cross-examination more times than I could count. But she didn't see any of that. She only saw a new face on her block, a threat to her HOA empire. And so, with gasoline in her hand and confidence in her smirk, she lit the match. 3 weeks earlier, I was looking for peace. Willow Ridge Commons had seemed like a postcard, a small, forest-lined neighborhood tucked into the Oregon hills. The kind of place where neighbors loaned sugar, not lawsuits. After 2 decades chasing monsters through federal courts, I craved quiet. A view, a yard, maybe a dog. I found the house on a Monday. By Wednesday, I'd signed the deed. By Thursday, she showed up. Her name was Deborah Langston, president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. She introduced herself like a realtor closing a deal. Handshake too firm, blazer too stiff, and that clipboard clutched like a gavel. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, forcing a smile. "I brought your membership packet. 47 pages. Regulations, restrictions, mandatory fees, architectural guidelines, lawn length measurements." "I appreciate the welcome," I said, handing it back, "but I won't be joining." Her smile died in stages. "Everyone joins. Mandatory. Let's just say, those who don't tend to regret it." The threat was wrapped in HOA language, but I'd heard it before. In different accents, different suits. From men who'd never worn pearls or carried a clipboard, but knew how to make people disappear just the same. This was no homeowners association. This was a criminal operation with better landscaping, and I was about to dismantle it. I started building the case that same night. While the neighborhood slept under its curated illusion of safety, I installed cameras. 3 visible, for hidden. 1 inside the mailbox, another tucked under the eaves, 2 more embedded in the flower beds out front. Standard procedure back in Chicago, except the people I used to surveil didn't mow their lawns twice a week or throw block parties with bake-offs and bounce houses. But power is power, no matter what it wears. And Deborah Langston wore hers like perfume, subtle but suffocating. The next morning, the first alert came through. 3:17 a.m. A figure in black pacing through my yard. On my phone screen, I watched her kneel by my mailbox, pull out a tape measure, and start snapping photos. Deborah, in all her suburban ninja glory. Her face half lit by the infrared camera. She looked absurd and terrifying. I didn't confront her. I documented her. That was the rule. Never burn your source. Let them burn themselves. By the end of the week, I had a file, timestamps, footage, audio. A complete dossier on one HOA president's descent into targeted harassment. I also had a pattern. The same tactics that organized crime used to silence dissent, Deborah was using on homeowners. Only here, the pressure came through fines, threats, and whispers, not bricks through windows. Same message, though, obey or pay. I needed intel from inside, so I built a quiet alliance. Bill Henderson first. Then Tom Franklin, a disabled veteran whose ramp request had been denied 3 times for aesthetic reasons. Then the Mendez family, who'd lost their landscaping contracts after refusing to donate to the HOA's beautification fund. I met them one by one, quietly, never the same place twice. We shared stories, shared notes. And then came Alice, 83 years old, lived in Willow Ridge longer than most of us had been alive. Her husband built the neighborhood park bench the HOA now fined people for sitting on after dusk. She was crying when I found her on her porch. "I waved to you yesterday," she said through trembling hands. "This morning, I got a notice. Unauthorized wind chimes, $750 fine. That's my whole check. I sat beside her. Alice, this isn't your fault. She said I was showing solidarity with disruptive influences. Alice whispered. My jaw clenched. I pulled out the file folder from my bag, the one with surveillance photos, records, and the beginnings of something big. What if I told you we could stop her? Not just protest. End her. Alice's eyes, clouded by age but still sharp, locked onto mine. She didn't ask how. She just said, tell me what to do. That's when everything changed. Alice's house, ignored by Deborah's enforcers because of her age, became our base of operations. We installed secure connections, recruited more residents, created a map of influence, who Deborah controlled, who she watched, and who was quietly ready to push back. And through it all, I kept documenting. Every note, every vandalized yard, every unjustified citation. Then came the discovery that turned our neighborhood battle into a federal case. It started with a hunch. The HOA's maintenance guy, quiet, always alone, drove a beat-up blue van that didn't belong to the association. One morning, I followed him. He stopped at a self-storage facility outside town. While he was inside, I slipped a GPS tracker under his bumper. 3 days later, I returned. This time, with a search warrant signed by Judge Amos L. Ridley, a man I once helped protect from a cartel threat during a trial in '09. The unit was registered under Deborah's maiden name. Inside, I found hell. Row after row of metal filing cabinets, each labeled with residents' names. Inside, tax records, medical histories, private photos, surveillance logs, copies of checks, notes on voting patterns, even pressure tactics tailored to each household. One drawer was labeled, eliminations successful. Inside were photos of the families who'd left, voice recordings of tearful conversations, images of their moving trucks, taken from angles that only someone close could have captured. It wasn't just control anymore. It was psychological warfare, and it was funded by the very dues Deborah demanded from her victims. Every criminal enterprise has a tipping point, a moment when hubris overrides caution. Deborah's came in the form of a special HOA meeting scheduled for Thursday night. She called it to announce a new security initiative that would require every homeowner to pay an additional $500 fee. I showed up early, sat in the back, and waited for my moment. The room was packed, tension thick. Deborah stood at the front like a queen addressing her court. Behind her, the board nodded obediently. That's when I stood up. I have a question, I said calmly. Page 3, line item 6, $43,000 for administrative consulting. Care to explain that, Deborah? Her smile vanished. What exactly are we consulting on? And why are those funds going into an unlisted account registered under your name? Gasps rippled through the room. Phones began recording. And Deborah? She finally realized who I was. She didn't blink. Not when I exposed the hidden account. Not when I quoted the statute on HOA financial transparency. Not even when I distributed copies of the Oregon revised statutes about unlawful use of community funds, highlighting the penalties in bold. Deborah Langston stood at the podium like she'd done nothing wrong, chin high, eyes cold. Her voice didn't even waver. Some people, she said, scanning the room, don't understand that community requires sacrifice. They come here, demand benefits without participation, and spread distrust. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Her eyes locked on me with enough venom to stun a bear. Then, in a voice dipped in ice, she added, some personal tragedies are entirely preventable. The crowd froze. That wasn't a veiled threat. That was a loaded gun left on the table. The meeting broke up in murmurs and glances. A few neighbors avoided eye contact. A few looked at me for the first time as something other than an outsider. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. Because if there's one thing I've learned about narcissists with power, it's that the moment they feel it slipping, they panic. And panic leads to mistakes. She didn't disappoint. At 3:07 a.m., the motion alert on my phone buzzed. I opened the security app groggily, expecting a raccoon or maybe a gust of wind. Instead, I saw Deborah. Not in a blazer. Not in pearls. In black gloves. A 5-gallon gas can in her right hand. She walked right into frame, lit by the motion-triggered lights, her expression blank. I sat up straight. She moved with practiced confidence, unscrewed the gas cap on my Dodge Charger, doused the hood, then the roof. She stepped back, reached into her coat, pulled out a match. Lit it. Held it a moment. then dropped it. Whoosh. The fire roared to life, a wall of heat and flame that sent her ponytail whipping in the sudden draft. The paint on the hood bubbled instantly. The glass cracked. And through it all, Deborah stood there, smiling, her arms folded, watching it burn like she'd earned it. I hit the panic button. Emergency protocols kicked in, live backups to encrypted cloud storage, multiple angle captures, GPS timestamps, and direct forwarding to a secure server in DC. Then I dialed 911. Arson in progress, I told the operator. Perpetrator is female. Name, Deborah Langston. I have visual confirmation, live feed, and audio. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Deborah turned casually, almost serenely, and walked toward the edge of the lawn. Neighbors had started to emerge, robes, flashlights, gasps of horror. And still, she showed no fear, no guilt, just dominance. This, she announced loud enough for everyone to hear, is what happens when people undermine community values. Her eyes met mine, through the smoke, through the fire, and she gave me a small, knowing nod. She thought she was untouchable. And for a long time, she had been. Because people didn't fight back. But I wasn't just a resident. I was the fire she couldn't contain. The police arrived minutes later. 2 officers. I recognized both of them from Deborah's files. She'd paid their kids' tuition, bought them new squad car gear. One had his name listed next to reliable, use when necessary. They took her statement first. She told them she'd been home asleep, that she'd heard the explosion from across the street and rushed over to help. I showed them the footage. They said it needed to be processed through official channels. I asked if they wanted to preserve the gasoline scent still wafting from her coat. They didn't answer. Deborah lingered after the police left. She walked up to me, so close I could smell the smoke clinging to her skin, and leaned in. Next time, she whispered, it might not be just her car. You know, accidents can happen inside a home. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly, because I had exactly what I needed. As dawn broke over the charred skeleton of my car, I made one final call. Not to a lawyer, not to the insurance company, but to Jessica Ramirez, my former deputy at the Chicago field office, now a senior agent at the FBI's Organized Crime Division. She picked up on the second ring. Logan? Jesus, it's been years. Jess, I said, my voice steady, I've got something. You're going to want to hear this. Give me the short version. Suburban HOA president. Arson, extortion, wire fraud, racketeering. Surveillance footage. Paper trail. Shell companies. Corrupt local cops. Organized system of intimidation and control. Possibly spanning multiple communities. Silence. Then, you're not joking. I haven't been joking since she lit my car on fire in front of me at 3 a.m. I'm pulling up a warrant team. Today. By 10 a.m., 7 federal warrants were in motion. By noon, the FBI had full jurisdiction. And by the next sunrise, Deborah Langston would no longer be the queen of anything. They called it Operation Garden Snake. A little inside joke from Jessica Ramirez. Because it's always the pretty gardens, she said, that hide the worst kinds of snakes. By 6 a.m., synchronized federal raids were in motion. 7 addresses. Deborah Langston's home. The Willow Ridge HOA office. 5 homes belonging to board members. All were hit at the same moment. Federal agents in tactical gear moved with precision, silent entry, secure containment, full data preservation teams in tow. I didn't participate in the raids directly. That would have blown my cover. Instead, I watched from across the street, coffee in hand, as the Queen of Willow Ridge stepped out of her perfectly landscaped doorway in a satin robe, blinking in confusion at the swarm of agents on her lawn. Federal warrant, ma'am, one of them said, already sliding gloves on. The mask of suburban civility cracked then and there. What is the meaning of this? I run this neighborhood. You don't anymore, the agent replied, stepping past her. She reached for her phone. 2 agents flanked her instantly. You'll want to put that down. By the time they reached her office, she'd already begun to unravel, insisting she was the victim, that this was political, that outsiders were trying to ruin the sanctity of Willow Ridge. Inside her home, they found gold. Literally and figuratively. Stacks of cash hidden behind drywall. A fireproof file cabinet labeled Private DL filled with detailed financial records from 3 previous HOAs, all with embezzlement patterns nearly identical to what we documented here. One binder stood out, embossed leather, neat tabs. On the spine, in Sharpie. Community management techniques, confidential. Inside, we found her playbook. Each tactic outlined. Each target categorized by resistance level. Isolation techniques. Suggested fines. Psychological tactics. Code enforcement shortcuts. Each resident who'd ever pushed back had their own page, complete with photos, vulnerabilities, family details, even personality assessments. Some pages were stamped eliminated in red ink. Others were still open. Mine had a note scrawled in the corner. Highly intelligent. Dangerous. Consider escalation. Well, she escalated, all right. Right into 15 federal charges. Board member Jim Baker, the treasurer, had kept surveillance logs, unlocked easily from his laptop. GPS pings. License plate snapshots. Notes like, Chong Family Garden Gnome, cited 4X. Still refuses to remove. Greenberg waved to Logan Hayes, violation next morning issued. Another member, Helen Porter, had a spreadsheet of HOA fines rerouted through fake maintenance accounts and redirected to a shell LLC based out of Tampa. Her emails revealed bonuses paid to local inspectors who found violations on cue. But the biggest find? In Deborah's garage, tucked behind boxes of fake poinsettias and 4th of July flags. A plastic storage container. Inside, clothing soaked in gasoline. The exact outfit she'd worn the night she torched my car. Still stinking of guilt. That afternoon, when all files were secured and every resident's information preserved, I finally stepped out from behind the curtain. Agents were leading Deborah out in handcuffs. Neighbors stood frozen on their porches, watching the fall of an empire they'd lived under for years. I stepped from my unmarked federal vehicle, flipped open the badge that had sat in my desk drawer for far too long. Logan Hayes, I said calmly. Federal Prosecutor. Organized Crime Division. Deborah's face didn't contort. It collapsed. You're a Fed, she hissed. This was a setup? No, I said. This was accountability. Her voice rose, desperate now. You think you can ruin me? Do you have any idea who I am? Actually, I said, I know exactly who you are. I leaned in close. And now, so does the United States government. The charges stuck. Racketeering. Wire fraud. Mail fraud. Arson. Extortion. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to intimidate witnesses. Abuse of authority under a false governance structure. 37 federal violations. And that was before the forensic accountants finished tracing the HOA funds to her offshore accounts. Her board members turned on her within 72 hours. Helen Porter was the first to flip, testifying that Deborah kept an elimination list, marking which families to drive out and when. Jim Baker followed, handing over an audio file of Deborah discussing neighborhood purification. One resident, Alice Greenberg, testified with fire in her voice, holding the $750 violation notice she'd been given for wind chimes and too many bird feeders. She punished me for kindness, Alice said. That's not a leader. That's a tyrant. And still, even in the courtroom, Deborah tried to play queen. Her defense. I was simply enforcing community standards. Order requires structure. Jessica Ramirez smiled like a wolf. Did order require gasoline and a match? When the jury watched the security footage of Deborah lighting my car on fire and standing back to admire it, it was over. She wasn't a protector. She was a predator. The judge, Eleanor Maxwell, delivered the sentence with icy finality. You weaponized neighborhood structures to build your own empire of fear. You exploited the trust of the people around you. You didn't just break the law. You broke the concept of community itself. Deborah Langston was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with additional time for obstruction and arson. The rest of the board received between 5 and 12 years. She was led away in cuffs, her HOA legacy reduced to ashes, just like my Dodge. As she passed me, she spat. I should have checked who you were before I burned your car. I smiled. Yes, you really should have. The sun rose over Willow Ridge differently after Deborah Langston was gone. Not brighter, not louder, just freer. There were no more anonymous notes in mailboxes. Number 3 a.m. flashlight patrols. No citations for unauthorized flower pots or unsanctioned wreaths. For the first time in years, people opened their front doors without looking over their shoulders. The reign of fear had ended, but fear leaves behind scars, and silence, and questions like, what now? So we began to answer them, not with rules, but with roots. The first meeting of the new Willow Ridge was held on my lawn. No stage, no microphone, no dress code, just lawn chairs, Tupperware dishes, a few picnic blankets, and for the first time in forever, neighbors who chose to show up. Not because they were afraid of being fined, but because they were curious what it felt like to belong again. Alice brought lemonade. The Mendez family grilled chicken. Tom Franklin arrived with a giant thermos of coffee and a smile that hadn't shown itself in years. We didn't vote on bylaws. We didn't debate fence height. We just introduced ourselves. "I've lived here 12 years, said Mr. Chong, but I don't think I've ever really met any of you." His wife nodded. Sandra kept us separated. Quiet neighbors are easier to control. Alice raised her cup. "Well, let's get loud." Laughter rippled across the lawn. And something strange, something beautiful happened. People started acting like neighbors again. We started small. The HOA charter, 73 pages of oppressive rules, was ceremoniously fed into a wood chipper at the next gathering. The sound it made was somewhere between catharsis and revolution. In its place, we drafted a single-page community covenant, rooted in mutual respect, not micromanagement. A few simple promises. Respect your neighbors. Keep your property safe and clean. Speak up if something's wrong. Help if you can. And never, ever weaponize where someone lives. The relief was palpable. The tension that once hovered between driveways evaporated. The most symbolic act of all? We tore down the marble and gold Willow Ridge Estates monument, the one Deborah had built at the entrance, the one she called a proud reminder of elite standards. We replaced it with a community garden, right on the same patch of land she used to stand on with her clipboard in condescension. The soil wasn't great. The weeds were stubborn. But the people were committed. The Chang kids painted the garden boxes. The Mendez family donated seeds. Alice named the first tomato plant Liberty. We grew tomatoes, peppers, herbs. But mostly, we grew connection. It wasn't all instant healing. Some neighbors still paused when someone knocked unexpectedly. Others flinched at the sound of footsteps on gravel at night. The trauma of living under Deborah's rule had soaked deep. People who had spent years fearing citations for leaving bikes on sidewalks or having too many guests now had to relearn what it meant to live without fear. So we created a restitution committee. Using assets seized from the old HOA account, we returned thousands of dollars in bogus fines to affected families. We helped Mrs. Gonzalez move back into her home after she was forced to sell when Deborah punished her for hanging her Puerto Rican flag. We delivered handwritten apologies, fixed broken fences, removed surveillance cameras Deborah's crew had installed in secret, and slowly, forgiveness found footing in the cracks she left behind. The biggest surprise? Helen Porter, the former HOA treasurer. After her reduced sentence, she sent a letter. Handwritten. No excuses. Just raw regret. I became part of something I didn't understand until it was too late. I hurt people to keep my place at the table. I can't undo it, but I hope I can say this. I'm sorry. It arrived the same day the first sunflowers bloomed in the garden. Alice read it aloud. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Tom Franklin said, "Everyone deserves a second chance." That became our unofficial motto. A year later, we held our first official neighborhood celebration. Not a HOA event. Just people. We grilled. We laughed. We sang badly to old country songs. Children chased each other between yards. No one worried about violations or policy. There were no clipboards. Just connection. I stood beside Alice as the sun dipped behind the garden we'd built together. For years, she said, we lived next to each other. She turned to me, her eyes full. Now, we live with each other. But Willow Ridge wasn't the only place to heal. Because news of what happened here didn't stay here. It spread across counties, across state lines, across the country. And soon, I'd realize Deborah Langston wasn't the only fire starter hiding behind HOA rules. At first, the letters came slowly. A yellow envelope from a widow in Tampa, fined $1,200 for planting rosemary in a non-regulation flower bed. A neatly typed note from a retired couple in Arizona, their home foreclosed after refusing to pay for mandatory driveway coating. Then the floodgates opened. Emails, messages, certified packages, testimonies. Our HOA president uses the same tactics. They said we'd be removed if we didn't conform. We never knew anyone else had gone through this until we read about you. Willow Ridge had been the spark, but the fire was already smoldering across the country. Jessica Ramirez and I regrouped at a quiet bistro in D.C., just down the street from the FBI field office. We sat at a corner booth, the table between us stacked with files from recent weeks, each marked with the same chilling code, HOAXD. "Look at this," she said, sliding me a folder from California. The board there had embezzled over $4 million through fake landscaping contracts. In Florida, another president had sold off homes she seized using manipulated violation reports. In New Mexico, residents were forced to pay emergency disaster dues after a fake inspection staged by board members and a complicit fire marshal. They're all using the same playbook, Jessica said grimly. I flipped through the reports. Different names, different neighborhoods, same fear, same silence, same weaponized rulebooks. Either someone's teaching them, I muttered, or they're learning by watching each other. We formed a task force, unofficially at first, codenamed HomeSafe, composed of analysts, investigators, digital forensics teams, and former victims turned whistleblowers. We built a digital repository, the Garden File, where homeowners across the U.S. could submit documentation, bylaws, letters, fines, suspicious charges. Within 2 months, it had over 800 entries. By month 3, that number tripled. Every submission strengthened the pattern. Each case, no matter how small, added to the overwhelming picture. HOAs were being used as shells for financial exploitation and social control. They operated like cartels, with less oversight than your average food truck. The breakthrough came when an analyst named Theo flagged a recurring name buried in multiple financial transfers. A consulting firm called Viridian Civic Partners. On paper, it helped communities optimize governance. In reality, it was a front company that trained HOA boards on non-traditional compliance strategies, legal speak for manipulation. One document outlined steps to neutralize resident resistance by staging neighborhood disputes, exploiting gray areas in municipal code, establishing influencer cliques to pressure outliers, using private security to intimidate under the guise of monitoring. It was Deborah's playbook, but she didn't write it. She bought it. And so did dozens of other HOA presidents across 12 states. We went public. National hearings were convened. Jessica and I testified before Congress, backed by a coalition of HOA abuse victims from across the country. The gallery was packed with families who had lost homes, savings, peace of mind. Alice Greenberg came with me. She stood before the committee, holding the original $750 wind chime citation Deborah had given her, and said, "This is what they used to make me feel small. But I'm not small anymore. None of us are." Her words were broadcast nationwide, and the flood turned into a reckoning. By year's end, the Neighborhood Protection Act passed with sweeping bipartisan support. The bill established federal oversight of HOA finances, required independent audits for any association collecting more than $100,000 annually, created a national database of board members with prior violations, protected whistleblowers under new housing rights provisions, and most importantly, gave residents the right to legally challenge citations without fear of retaliation. It didn't just change policy. It changed culture. Former victims began running for office on platforms of transparency and accountability. One of them, Diana West, won a city council seat in Colorado Springs. She'd once been fined $200 for letting her disabled son's wheelchair ramp stay extended too long. Now, she was rewriting the very rules that punished her. "I'm not here to destroy HOAs," she said during her inauguration. "I'm here to make sure they never destroy another family." Willow Ridge became a model. The community garden expanded. A local news station aired a 3-part documentary called Behind the White Picket Fence. High school students started interviewing longtime residents about life under Deborah's rule for history class. Children once too scared to play in their front yards now organized bike races down the cul-de-sac. No one worried about being cited for unsafe activity. And on the 1-year anniversary of Deborah's conviction, we held a celebration. Not a party. A tribute. To the people who stayed. To the ones who stood up. To the idea that neighborhoods should be made of people, not power. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes, it grows in a garden. Sometimes, it's as simple as wind chimes, finally allowed to ring freely. It arrived without a return address. Just a cream-colored envelope, thick paper, no postage stamp. Slid through the mail slot sometime after midnight. I just finished watering the basil in the community garden when I saw it on my hallway floor. No handwriting. No name. No markings except a small raised insignia in the lower corner. A single oak leaf, embossed in gold. I knew that symbol. So did Deborah. It was the mark of Viridian Civic Partners. Inside, folded neatly in thirds, was a single sheet of stationery. Typed, precise, clinical, to Mr. Logan Hayes. We are aware of your role in the destabilization of several of our affiliated community organizations. While we acknowledge your legal positioning and the media attention granted to your efforts, we feel compelled to remind you that for every neighborhood you liberate, there are 5 more who willingly choose structure over chaos. We are not interested in confrontation, but should you continue to pursue legal action against our extended network, you may find that public support is more conditional than you realize. Order is not a threat. It is the only thing standing between civility and collapse. Consider this our final correspondence. Sincerely, VCP Compliance Division. I read it twice, then a third time, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Perfectly. This wasn't a threat from a single corrupt HOA president with a god complex. This was a system warning me that I hadn't ended anything. I just peeled back the first layer. I walked out onto my porch, the late summer breeze rustling the leaves of the garden. In the distance, kids were laughing. Alice was arguing with Tom about the proper ratio of compost to soil. Someone strummed a guitar under the sycamore tree. It was peaceful, but I'd seen peace before. Manufactured, manipulated, used like a shield to hide rot. No one else in Willowridge needed to know, not yet. They'd earned their calm. They deserved it. But I couldn't ignore the letter. So I folded it, tucked it into a manila folder marked pending, and slid it into the back of my filing cabinet beneath 3 layers of classified documentation. I stared at it for a long time, then locked the drawer. The next morning, I woke to a new letter. This one with handwriting. Sloppy, rushed, scribbled in Sharpie on torn notebook paper. Thank you. For standing up. For not letting her win. I don't know how to fix what happened to my family. But I know now we weren't crazy. And we weren't alone. There was no signature. Just the return address. Maple Hollow, Tennessee. Another town. Another HOA. Another fight waiting to happen. I smiled. Because the thing about snakes in the garden? Once you know where they hide, you never stop looking.